All right, I've got 8:33, so we'll go ahead and get started. We'll do some introductions first. First of all, welcome to SLEIS Training. If you signed up for the February 9th AM session, you're in the right spot. Today's training will last, we've been typically going about 3 hours. There'll be plenty of time to get through the agenda and time for questions at the end. We'll go ahead and introduce ourselves first. My name is Nick Page, and I'm the lead worker in the emissions inventory section for the DNR Air Quality Bureau. I've been with the DNR almost 20 years now. Have a lot of experience in emissions inventory work, and some of my main responsibilities include collecting and quality assuring emissions inventory data for point sources in Iowa. And we take that data and submit it as part of the NEI, which is the National Emissions Inventory. And that report is due December 31st each year. So we have about 9 months to turn the data around, get it in the format that's acceptable to EPA, and make sure that the numbers look right. So we do a lot of quality assurance of the inventory data that's submitted. We also do quite a bit of outreach, provide assistance to facilities, especially this time of year. Obviously, with SLEIS Training, we did a couple sessions yesterday. We have 2 more today, and then 2 more scheduled for February 22nd. So we spent a lot of time on the phone and communicating with facilities, usually February and March, and then again with minor source facilities in April and May. Answering questions, helping facilities get their inventory data in on time and in an accurate manner. We also do spend a lot of time responding to information requests, especially this time of year with the legislature back in session. Lots of times people at the State House will have questions regarding air emissions data, and so we collect the data to help respond to those requests. So that's just a little bit about what I do. I'll pass it over to Christy, and she can introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Christy Monster. I have been working for the DNR since 2008 and in emissions inventory since 2010. I'm an environmental specialist. So Nick's the lead worker. I have another coworker, Seth Anderson. So Seth Anderson and I are the specialists. We spend a lot of time reviewing inventories, assisting facilities with submitting their inventories. So things like, we're always available if you need help with anything, like, finding an emissions factor or an SCC number, or, just figuring out how to calculate emissions or how SLEIS works, any of those things, please give us a call. We're available. I have another portion of my job, which is completing the greenhouse gas inventory for the state. But I do spend most of my time just looking at emissions inventories and helping people out. On to Jason.
Morning, I'm Jason Dowie. I am actually with the support section of the Air Quality Bureau. I've been with air quality for just over 14 years now. I act as an additional help desk person for the SLEIS system, assisting Christy and Nick and Seth. I'm also help desk for the Iowa Easy Air system, which is our permitting system. So I may have already spoken with a few of you regarding that system. But as we go along through the training today, I'll be monitoring any questions that come up in the chat. So if you have a question you want to ask as information is being presented, you can either write it in the chat and I'll respond as fast as possible, or you can unmute yourself and ask. But feel free to reach out to myself as well. If you have any questions after the training is done as well, when you email the SLEIS Help Desk email account, I receive that as well. So feel free to reach out if you need any additional help.
Thanks, Jason. So in Iowa, there are 2 different types of air facilities. We have Title V facilities. There's about 275 to 280 of those facilities that have to report. Their deadline is March 31st. And then we also have minor source facilities that report once every 3 years. And today joining us is Jennifer Wittenberg, and I'll let her introduce herself and how what their role is as far as helping minor source facilities submit their inventory.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and I'm happy to be here again today. My name is Jennifer Wittenberg. I am the program manager for the Iowa Air Emissions Assistance Program. Our program has worked extensively with the DNR, Nick, and all of his group for many, many years. I've actually been here since 2007, so I've worked with them for many years. And we have provided, or we've created several tools and resources for businesses, any businesses to use to help them as they're completing their inventory. So we have some emissions calculators that Nick will talk about later on in the training, as well as some tutorials that might be helpful as you work through your inventory requirement. We have a website that houses all of those with some additional resources as well. I will put a link to that website in the chat here when I get done. In addition, as Nick mentioned, we help facilities that are considered minor sources that have less than 100 employees in the state of Iowa. We have one-on-one training and education for those facilities available to work with one of our specialists to help them as they work through their inventory. And that could be, helping them with their calculations if they get stuck, need some additional help, if they need help with any of the calculators that we have, as well as guiding them through SLEIS. So if you get done with training today and you're still a little unsure of what you need to do, if you happen to be a minor source, less than 100 employees, feel free to reach out and we can help you with that as well. That assistance is free, so that's even better. So we're happy to help. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, if you're a minor source facility, strongly suggest that you reach out to Jen's group. They provide great assistance and they've had nothing but rave reviews over the years. So take full advantage of that free assistance that they provide. Just wanted to give everybody a heads up that the training today is being recorded. We do this every year just so facilities can go back. If they weren't able to attend training, they can go back and view one of the trainings. So just a heads up, it is being recorded today. Okay, so Jason, if you don't mind pulling up the agenda, we'll talk a little bit about what to expect today, and then we'll get into the training. So we have a small group. I think there's, let's see, 5 or 6 of us, 5 or 6 new trainees today. So I think that'll lend itself to the flexibility of stopping training if we need to slow down. If you have questions, feel free to stop us. The training is meant to be really informal. So, if we get going too fast, or if we spit out an acronym that we don't fully explain and you need to know a little bit more about what it is we're talking about, again, use that chat. Jason can monitor that, or you can just unmute yourself and stop us, and we can slow down a little bit and explain things a little bit more in detail if needed. So, so we'll start off. I've got about a 15 slide presentation that will go over our AIR program, why we collect the data, what the data is used for, a little bit about SLEIS and how it was developed, and then we'll get into hands-on training for those of you that have a SLEIS account already created. If you didn't get your form in on time, that's fine. You'll just have to follow along with a screen that we share, and we'll be using a SLEIS training facility. For those that are that do have the ability to have hands-on training because you have a SLEIS account already, just make sure that you know that all the data that you are looking at is live. It's in our we're using the production database, so anything that you do change and save will stick. So just keep that in mind too. So once we get into hands-on training, we'll show you how to log into the system, update your user profile, and then most of the time today will be spent on updating your general facility information and your equipment lists. And then once we have that, once we get through that part of the training, we'll take probably about a 10-minute break or so. And then we'll come back and show you how to enter data for your emissions inventory, which is why most of you are here today. And there's 2 ways to get that data into SLEIS. One is using the user interface, And then the other one is using the import feature. So Christy will show you how to do that. And then once we have all of our data in, either through the user interface or the import, we'll show you how to validate your emissions report and then submit it. Also, if needed, it's always helpful to know if you made a mistake or forgot something, how to resubmit. So we'll show you how to request an amendment to your initial emissions inventory submittal. And then at the end, we'll have time, plenty of time for questions. And if you have questions specific to your facility, we'd prefer to hold those till the very end, and then we'll wrap up. And I'm guessing we'll be done by like 11:30 or so. It just kind of depends on how many questions we have. So that's what the day looks like, or at least the morning, what it looks like here today. So Jason, if you want to pull up the PowerPoint. Okay, so today is February 9th. We had, like I said, we had training yesterday. So hopefully you're getting a little more polished version of our presentation. So what is SLEIS? SLEIS is an acronym that stands for the State and Local Emissions Inventory System, and it is a web-based inventory system. It does not have a permitting component to it. Our online permitting database is called Iowa Easy Air. It's been in production for over 2 years now. And that's the system that you would want to use if you were applying for a construction permit or a Title V operating permit. But just know that SLEIS is only for emissions reporting. SLEIS was developed by Windsor Solutions and the original SLEIS consortium. And that consortium consisted of 6 state and local air agencies. And they got together at an emissions inventory conference back in 2008 to develop SLEIS and a way to a better flow of their inventory data to EPA. And today, SLEIS consists of about 25 or 30 state and local air agencies. So you can see how fast the SLEIS using community is growing. And that's due to ease of use and just general popularity. And Windsor does a great job of customer support. So whenever we come up with an issue, there's a troubleshooting issue, we can rely comfortably on Windsor to help us with any problems that you may be experiencing if we can't handle it ourselves. So this slide just shows you how the data flows from the industry or stakeholder role there on the left. So it's the facility sitting down, data entering, facility information, equipment list, emissions inventories, things like that. That's what we call the public data store. And before you can submit your emissions inventory to DNR, you have to go through a validation process. And it's basically just running a bunch of QA, QC checks to make sure that every field that is required has a piece of information in it, and it's in the correct code and format. And once you pass the validation, that emissions inventory is allowed to pass through to what's called the agency data store, and that's the middle rectangle there. That's where the DNR does some QA, QC, and formats the data such that it would be able to be accepted at EPA's front step. And so we go through that validation process ourselves. And once we make it through that process, the data gets, gets accepted by EPA's emissions inventory system, or EIS. And then that's where EPA collects or compiles emissions data from all over the country, and it makes its way into what's called the National Emissions Inventory. And there's several different publications that arise from that data set. One of them being the Air Tox Screen, which is formerly known as the National Air Toxics Assessment. So lots of reasons or lots of ways that EPA uses emissions data, drilling down all the way to the facility level and even at the process level within each facility. SLEIS capabilities. SLEIS has the ability to import data for process emissions, things like pollutant codes, emission factors, calculation method codes, operating schedules, emissions estimates, things like that. It does not have the ability to import equipment lists. That's just when they developed the software, they wanted to stay away from that because equipment lists are so fluid. And it was just a way to keep the database accurate and not be changing over time. So they limited the import data to process emissions only. You can, however, export equipment lists and process lists, and we'll show you how to do that when we get into the training. SLEIS gives users the ability to request amendments or even repudiate an emissions inventory. So if an emissions inventory was submitted by mistake or erroneously, illegally even, you have the ability to delete that from the record. It's only happened once, I think, in the 8 or 9 years that we've had the system up and running. So it doesn't happen very often. There's also a tip tool that users can click on a little button and it'll open up a window and it'll provide guidance on what it is we're requesting, or even in some cases how to find the data that we're asking facilities to submit. SLEIS also provides validation errors to our users and lets them know, hey, this data field is required, or you have an incorrect format for this data element that you entered. This is how you fix it. So it's pretty prescriptive in that nature. It'll tell you exactly what's missing or what's wrong, and then how to fix that data. A couple more. So SLEIS has multi-browser support. There aren't any add-ons to install. And it also has a forgot password feature. So if you go to the login screen, and you'll notice that there's a forgot password hyperlink. So SLEIS allows 2 unsuccessful logins before, and then on the third one, it'll lock you out. So you're good for the first 2, you'll still have 1 more attempt, but if you get to that third one and you still can't remember your password, SLEIS will lock you out, then you have to go through the DNR to get it unlocked. But if you get those notifications that it's an unsuccessful login attempt, just click that forgot password hyperlink, and SLEIS will send you an email with a link for you to reset your password by yourself. So this slide here just shows you the SLEIS access request form. Excuse me. The access request form is used to set up your SLEIS account. So for those of you that have not set your account up yet and you've received an email from me, this is the form that we need you to fill out. You can complete it electronically and email it back to us. And as soon as we get that form, it takes us less than a minute to create your account. At that point, SLEIS would send you an email with a hyperlink to set up your initial account password. It's a pretty quick process. So the top part of the form explains, like, if you are supposed to be just an additional user at the facility, or if you are replacing somebody. So there's a checkbox there. Maybe someone has retired or moved on. You would just click one of those checkboxes and say, hey, I'm replacing John Doe. The middle part of the form has the roles that are assigned to each one of the users. So you could either be a viewer, an editor, and or an administrator. So the viewer is simply just that. You can log in and you can only view data. If you are an editor or a consultant for the facility, that means you have the ability to change facility level information, equipment lists. You're able to add equipment. You're able to remove equipment from the emissions report. You're able to enter emissions inventory data. And then the administrator is the person who can change roles for facility users or remove users altogether. Don't confuse an administrator with the person that would be submitting the emissions inventory. That person would be the submitter, and we'll get to that form in just a second. But the administrator only has the ability to change roles for users or remove users from a facility. The bottom half of the form is a table to indicate which facilities you would like to gain access to and what roles you want for each one of those facilities. So you may have just one facility, you may have multiple facilities, and you can have different roles for each one of those facilities that you list. So the table there on the left side of that table, it's asking you for what's your facility name. The second column is a place for you to indicate, what like the location of that facility. So if you have, say if you have multiple facilities in the same city, we want you to include the address there so we can distinguish between the two. And then the facility number, that third column, it's actually, we're asking for the DNR facility ID, and that's normally found on any letter that we send you. Some facilities have put their phone number down here. We're not looking for that. We're just looking for the DNR facility number. And then the last column there on the right is for you to indicate what role, viewer, editor, administrator, maybe all three, you want for each one of the facilities that you list. And then there at the bottom, we're asking you for your user identification information, your name, your title. Bare minimum, we need your name and your phone number and your email address. We can't create a SLEIS account without your email address, and it has to be a specific one. Like we can't use a generic email address that doesn't identify who the user is tied with any record changes that happen within the database itself. So this is the pages 1 and 2 of the subscriber agreement form. And this is the form that would be completed by anybody who intends to make the official emissions inventory submittal. So likely your responsible official of the plant. So it needs to be completed with a wet ink signature, and you need to send the original hard copy version of the form to the address here at the Air Quality Bureau, which is 502 East 9th Street in Des Moines. And again, wet ink signature only, just so we can be compliant with EPA's Chrome Air rule. Chrome Air stands for the Cross Media Electronic Reporting Rule. And if we go to the next slide, the third page of this form is just a way for facilities to indicate, hey, I want to be the submitter for all of these facilities. So just fill out, for both the forms that we just showed you, it's intended only for one user to fill out the form. We wouldn't want multiple contacts on the form. It's just one facility user and multiple facilities if need be. So this slide here, I forgot to mention at the beginning, I'll send a PDF of this presentation out to everybody either late today or first thing tomorrow morning, so you don't feel like you need to track all this stuff down, write it all down. We'll send you a copy of the presentation. So I've included a URL here to have for you to go out to our website, one of our websites, and take a look at our SLEIS training tutorials. There's 12 of them. So those tutorials will cover everything that we talk about today. So if you don't quite catch something, or if we go too fast, you can always go out and look at these training tutorials, and they're set up where you can pause, fast forward, and rewind them, learn at your own pace type of thing. So definitely take a look at this after the training today, especially if you don't intend to start your emissions inventory here for another couple of weeks or whatever the case may be. More SLEIS resources. So we have an e-air services webpage. I've included the URL here. It includes any scheduled trainings. So if you're not there right now, I think you might still be able to even register for the training this afternoon. We also have trainings on February 22nd, and then an in-person training April 5th. That would be more geared toward minor sources, because by then the Title V reporting deadline's come and gone, and the minor source inventory deadline is May 15th. So you could sign up for that in-person training if you wanted to. There's also the forms that we just covered. There's links there to download those forms. We also have a 101 SLEIS 101 users guide available to download there too. The second bullet here is the hyperlink to the SLEIS online reporting system. And then we also have an email account dedicated just for SLEIS assistance. So if you have questions regarding emissions inventory submittal in SLEIS, you can shoot an email to slice@dnr.iowa.gov, and we have 4 or 5 people that are linked to that email account. So we'd recommend that you send any questions to that email address rather than our personal email addresses, just because if one of us is out of the office, there's another person ready to respond to any requests that you have, and you'll get a more timely response if you do it that way. So what's in place that's requiring facilities to submit their emissions inventory data to DNR? And the rule that requires it is the AERR. It's an EPA rule, stands for the Air Emissions Reporting Requirement. I've included a hyperlink here. If you want to learn a little bit more about that rule, you can go to that website. It's in the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 51, and essentially the AERR was put in place to consolidate and streamline previous requirements from older rules for state and local air agencies to submit emissions inventory information to EPA. A little bit about what we use the emissions inventory data for. We use it to develop control and maintenance strategies required by the Clean Air Act. It also helps us identify emission levels and trends throughout the state. I had a supervisor once tell us, you can't manage what you don't measure. So that's a good thing to remember there. We use it to track our progress towards meeting the national ambient air quality standards as set by EPA. We do use it for some of our dispersion modeling activities in the Bureau. One of the big things or big items that we use inventory data for is to verify emissions estimates through the air tox screen. I have it listed as a national air toxics assessment on the slide. It's a little bit outdated. They just renamed it here in the last year. So we've had facilities in the past that would show up in an air tox screen as having potential higher health risk in their community, even down to the census tract level, or EPA gets a hold of some information submitted either through an emissions inventory or the toxics release inventory. And using the emissions data that EPA has, along with stack parameter information, there's been times where like I said, we've had an elevated health risk, and most of the time it turns out that the emissions inventory information was incorrect at some level, whether it be an emission factor, a unit of measure, the actual emissions estimate was overestimated, or maybe there's a stack parameter that was just incorrect altogether that led to that health concern. So we go back and look at your emissions inventory to verify, confirm, or deny that whatever EPA's estimate was possibly incorrect. So we do look at your data, and the data that you submit to us does matter. So be careful when you're reporting your emission factors, your throughput, your units of measure, things like that. We also use it for SIP work. SIP stands for State Implementation Plan. Like I mentioned earlier, we get quite a few information requests, both internally and externally throughout the year, specific to what are the SO2 emissions in this county from this type of industrial process. So we go back and run queries from our database to find data pretty specific level data to respond to. And then we also sometimes use emissions inventory data to help site monitors for our ambient air monitoring network. A few more resources here. So this website that we've got listed, it includes example calculations, emissions inventory calculators that Jen's group has put together throughout the years, specific to like industry specific calculators such as concrete batch, hot mix asphalt, limestone crushing, group 2 grain elevators. But then we also have calculators specific to industrial processes such as painting, welding, laser cutting, things like that. So we can go out to this website here toward the end of the training and show you where to find those, what they look like. We also have a source classification code list that you'll need when you go to create your equipment list in SLEIS. There's also definitions to key air quality terms, as well as links to different emission factor publications such as AP42 and WebFire. This last slide here just gives you our contact information. Feel free to contact us, call us, email us, whichever is more convenient for you. We pride ourselves in getting back to facilities in a quick manner. Normally, you'll get a response same day, but if you are having trouble getting hold of one of us, it might be because we're sick, out on vacation, whatever it may be. reach out to the SLEIS help desk account and you'll get a response probably a little bit sooner than you would otherwise. And I think that's the last slide. So I'll pause there. That's just a brief, very brief overview of why we collect the data, what it's used for, a little bit about how SLEIS was born, so to speak. So if you have any questions about that, I'll pause now, and then we can start the hands-on training portion. We all good in the chat, Jason?
Yep, good so far.
Okay, so with that, I will share my screen and we'll get started with hands-on SLEIS training. Okay, so I'm not sure, Jason, if you've added the SLEIS URL into the chat. If you could add that, that'd be great.
Yeah, Christy's got it there.
Sweet, thank you, Christy. So if you haven't already, and if you do have a SLEIS account, go ahead and copy that URL, paste it into a web browser, and it'll take you to this SLEIS welcome screen. And the first thing that I'll point out to you is there are two hyperlinks here for forms. One is for the reporting registration form. So again, this is the one that you would use if you wanted to be a viewer, editor, or administrator. And then the one below that is the link for the subscriber agreement form. That's for the person who's going to make the official submittal. We have two links for the SLEIS help desk, one here and one here at the bottom. So if you needed to send us questions, comments, feedback, you would use either one of these links. It'll take you to the same place. There's also a link here for the import specifications file. Christy is going to handle that toward the end of the training today. So if you need to learn a little bit more about those import specs, you can click this link and download that file. And then I mentioned one of the things on our website is a source classification code table. We've included it here in SLEIS just for your convenience, so you wouldn't have to go out to a different website to download that list of SEC numbers that you would use as part of your emissions inventory. So a couple resources there for you. And then the other thing to mention here on the screen is up here at the top right. It's just kind of a news headline. So here you can see here we posted some training videos a while back, and then anytime we go to a new version of SLEIS, that'll be mentioned up here in the upper right corner. Okay, so let's have everybody click the login link in the upper right corner, and it'll take you to the login screen. And I'll talk a little bit about this forgot password hyperlink first. So if you ever get to the point where you can't remember your password, just click this hyperlink, and that will take you to a request password reset screen. Simply type in your email address here and then click the submit button. At that point, SLEIS will send you an email with a new hyperlink to reset your password. Okay, so the email address that you're going to use is the one that you used on the form that you sent in to us. And we'll go ahead and have you log into the database. I'm going to be using the SLEIS help desk account today. So the screens that I'm sharing is just for fictitious. It's a training facility. So nothing you see is real. But if you use your work and log into your site again, you are touching live data. So just be careful what you change and what you save, because it'll stick. Okay, so once you log in, you are taken to the My Facility screen. And you can see here our SLEIS help desk account is linked up to some real sites and then just some training sites down here at the bottom. You may only have one site that you're looking at. It all depends on how many you listed on that access request form that you filled out, that table I was talking about earlier. The facilities that are on the table on the form you sent in should match the screen that you're looking at right now. So some of you may see one, while others may see many. On this screen, the data that you're looking at, you've got the DNR facility ID over here on the left, your facility name in the second column, and then the role or the roles that you have for each one of those facilities here. And then you have this column here. The fourth column is the ready for submission column, and that'll simply tell you if you have an emissions inventory that is ready to be submitted. So you've gone through the data entry process and you've validated it, and the database has said, okay, checked out all the required fields. They all have data in them. They're all in the correct format. We just need your submitter to log in and submit the report to us. So if that's the case, you'll see the year of the emissions report that's ready to be submitted. The last column over here on the right is actions column. And basically there should just be one button over here. It's you click this button over here on the right, it's kind of like the front door to your facility. Just click that and it'll take you there. Each one of these columns can be sorted ascending or descending order. You can see the data changes as I click on it. And then there's also a filter box up here, and this filter box appears in a lot of the SLEIS screens. So if you're trying to quickly navigate to a certain record, you just type in, you could search by facility ID, your facility name, anything on this screen, and you can filter for it. So if I was looking for safety clean, a facility here in Des Moines, I could easily navigate to it by just typing in all or part of the facility name. Okay, so go ahead and click on the open button for whatever facility it is you want to look at today over here on the right side of the screen. I'm going to open up our SLEIS training facility. And once you do that, you should be taken to the emissions report screen for the facility you just clicked on. And you can see here, we have emissions reports going. We have the one for 2022, and we have one each year going back all the way to 2014. Title V facilities, you should have an emissions report every year. Going back, the earliest you would see is 2011, because that's the year that we decided to migrate data from SPARS to SLEIS all the way back from 2011 going forward. So nobody should see anything prior to 2011. Title V facilities, like I said, you have a emissions inventory requirement annually. So for each year that your facility was a Title V facility, you would have an emissions inventory report. If you are a minor source facility, then you would only see an inventory report in there on this screen once every 3 years. So that's why some of you may not have one every single year, but you've got your reporting year over here on the left, the due date. So anywhere you see March 31st, you know that's a Title V. That represents a year that the facility was Title V. If you see the due date as May 15th, that's how you would recognize if the facility was a minor source facility for that year. You also have the date that the inventory was submitted, the status of the report. So you can see that 2014 through 2021, it's all listed as the inventory report has been submitted. You can see that the status for the 2022 report is in process. We did some training yesterday, so we had started the report, submitted it, and then we kind of reset the process for the afternoon session. Now we've reset it again for today's training session. So that's why you see the status as in process. Over here on the right, you have the actions heading again. If you have not yet started the report for 2022, your icon will look like a play button. If you have started it, you'll see the button look like this here today. So before we go ahead and start it or resume your emissions report for 2022, I wanted to bring your attention over here to the authorized facility users heading. Below that, there's a link that says view facility users. So if you click that, you can see all the users at your facility. In this case, we only have the SLEIS Help Desk account. So you've got your username on the left, their email address, the roles that user has for this particular facility, and whether or not this user is active. You could see some users as inactive. If that's the case, you can always delete that user from your site. Maybe they've retired or they've moved on. Under the actions heading, you may not see all 3 buttons here. I've got a magnifying glass, which indicates I can view only. I've got a gear icon, which means I can edit that user. And I also have a trash can icon, which means I can delete. So these buttons represent the roles that you applied for on your form. So viewer, editor, administrator. Just depends on which roles you asked for when you set up your SLEIS account. So you can go in and edit your profile by clicking the gear icon or the edit button. You'll notice that this field here, the full name field, it has a red bar on the left side of the screen that indicates that SLEIS is requiring you to put something in that field. If you don't see a red bar, it's optional. So you can go in here and provide your name, title, organization, your mailing address, contact information. So you have to have at least one contact type, and a contact type would consist of email, phone, cell phone, fax, other might be your mailing address. But you have to have at least one. And then if you have a contact type, you also have to provide a value. So for instance, if I came in here and added phone and then tried to save it without putting in a phone number, then SLEIS is going to tell me this field is required. And so I've got to put in my phone number. And then not only do I have to put a phone number in, but it also has a specific format that it's expecting you to enter. And in this case, it wants your area code to be in parentheses because it lists it right here. And then again, if you're an administrator, you can change roles down here. Maybe I want this person only to be a viewer. So I would just change the radio button from editor to viewer. Click save, and then it'll accept your changes. Okay, so I just use this user interface back button to get back up to this emissions report screen that we were just at. We'll talk a little bit more on when to use the UI button versus the browser back button a little bit later in the training. So that's what the facility view facility users hyperlink will show you. So now we'll get into your 2022 emissions report. So if you have a SLEIS account and you want to look at that, then go ahead and click this open button underneath the actions heading for the 2022 row. And once you do that, SLEIS will take you to the 2022 emissions report screen. Okay, so there's a couple things to point out on the screen. So we've got 2 sets of buttons up here, upper left corner. We've got the facility inventory, and don't confuse facility inventory with emissions inventory. Your facility inventory in SLEIS really just means your facility level information and all of your equipment. Okay, that's what's meant by facility inventory. Your emissions inventory is covered under the process emissions button and the report attachments button. But you have to complete all of these buttons first to set up your equipment list before you go in to report your emissions inventory, because maybe you've added equipment since the last year. And if you tried to go in and report your emissions before setting up your equipment, that equipment's not going to exist. You can't report emissions for it. So we tell facilities, when you are working in SLEIS, conduct your data entry like you would when you read a book, top to bottom, left to right. So start here, facility button, go through unit processes, and then second go to the process emissions and report attachments button. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to start with the facility button first. And it takes you to a general facility information screen. And in that screen, you've got 5 tabs to go through. Whenever you see the blue highlighted tab, that the information displayed below is corresponding with this blue tab. But you can see, like, I'm trying to click here. I can't get anything to activate. And that's because you have to go down here and click the edit button in the lower right corner. Sometimes facilities miss that when they first log in. Again, if you only have the viewer role, you won't have this edit button. You'll only be able to scroll through and just look at the data. You have to have the editor role in order to have this button down here in the lower right corner. So I'm going to go ahead and click this edit button to activate these fields. So underneath the facility tab, the first thing you'll notice is the facility identifier and the facility name. Again, I'm clicking on them and I can't get them to activate. And that's because we locked these 2 data elements, these 2 data fields down. We didn't want facilities to go in here and change this number, because this number really should never change over time. We need to be able to track emissions over the course of time. And if facility IDs are getting changed, that makes it impossible for us to do that. So really, there isn't a situation where your facility ID would change. The DNR issues that and it stays that number forever. Facility name, we also decided to lock that one, lock that field down. It doesn't mean you can't change your facility name. Obviously, that happens quite a bit. You would just need to route that request through our record center, or you can send an email or a letter to one of our emissions inventory staff, and we can get that updated in SLEIS. And then also share that information with the rest of our bureau. The parent company or owner name is a field that you can change. So I'm just going to delete this for now. You see it's got that red bar on the left side of the field, which means it's required. So if I try to save this record without a name there, SLEIS is going to put up this pink ribbon at the top of the screen and give us a validation error saying that there's a piece of information missing on the facility tab. That's why I have that yellow caution triangle there at the top. And then if you look on this screen, anywhere we are missing information, or if there's an incorrect code that was used, it'll put some red text below that field and tell you what's wrong with it. So here, basically it's saying you have to put a facility or parent company or owner name in that box before SLEIS will let you save this record. So I'm going to type Iowa DNR back in there and then click save. And you'll see that the blue ribbon at the top says the facility was successfully updated. The next field is the description field. And you know that it's not required because it doesn't have a red bar on the left side of this field. So you can leave that blank. You're also welcome to put in any additional information in there if it helps your facility, or if you think it might help the DNR in some way, go ahead and add information. That's fine too. Again, I mentioned the tip tools during the slide presentation, and those are indicated by this green dot with the white question mark inside. So if you click that, it'll open up a window and it'll describe what it is we're looking for and how to find that data. In some cases, we may give you an external URL for you to go to find whatever it is we're asking for you to data enter. So the status here, it is required. If you click it, it's a drop-down menu, and your options are ONRE if you are a minor source facility, OP if you're Title V, and then either PS or TS if you are permanently or temporarily shut down. So if your status is anything other than operating, so let's say you're a minor source facility, then the status year, so I tried to save it, the status year becomes required. It doesn't have the red bar on the left side of the field, but it's conditionally required. So like I said, if it's ONRE, PS, or TS, you have to put in a status year here. So maybe your facility dropped out of the Title V program. You obtained some construction permits to limit your emissions. You have to tell us what year that happened. So if that happened in 2020, you'd put that year there, click the save button, and it would update. I'm going to wipe that out because I think that we want it for training purposes. We want to be listed as an operating as Title V facility. You click save and it accepts it because, like I said, with the status year, if it's OP, you don't need a status. If the status is OP, you don't need a status year entered. Last thing on this tab that's required is the NAICS code. NAICS stands for North American Industrial Classification System. And it's a 6-digit number that describes what's happening at your facility. If you can have more than one NAICS code. So if you have more than one NAICS code, you can click this add button on the right and it'll include a new row. And you can click it again and again if you need to. If there's a NAICS code that's listed that you no longer need, you just click this trash can icon button here and delete it. But you have to have at least one of your NAICS codes has to be indicated as primary. If you need to enter a NAICS code, if you know that number, you can just start typing the number and it will bring up a list of codes within the table that match your search criteria. You can either search by number or by description. There is a comments field here at the bottom, like most screens have this, but it's not required for you to enter anything in there. So we've met all of the business rules on this this screen. We're going to move over to the contacts tab. And here there's only room for one contact, and that's the emissions contact for your facility. So basically we're asking if we have questions during our review of your emissions inventory, who are we supposed to contact with those questions? So you put their first and last name here, and then at least one contact type right here. For my name, I've got an email and a phone number listed. If you needed to add one, again, add button over here on the right. If you want to take it away, just delete it. Again, at least one contact type, and then for each contact type that you list, you got to have a value off to the right. Pretty straightforward. Moving on to the addresses tab, we have space for you to enter your physical location, your street address, your city, your state, and your zip code. The state should always be Iowa for your physical location. Your mailing address down here at the bottom. Again, street, city, state, and zip code. Be sure that if you change your mailing address that you are updating this information down here. Back in early January, we sent out about 1,200 letters. Every year we get a lot of letters that come back. So we send a letter out for facilities that aren't required, and we also send out a letter for facilities that are required, just as a courtesy. So if you're a facility that is required to submit the emissions inventory and we have a bad mailing address for you, that letter sometimes takes 3-4 weeks to get back to us. I'm not sure what happens. Sometimes there's delays with the postal service. So that's like, 3 or 4 weeks less that you have to get your emissions inventory back into us. If we don't know the right mailing address, we have to go online, do internet searches, go look up phone numbers, email address. Sometimes it's hard to get the correct mailing address. So be sure that you're updating that if it changes. So the location tab, this is for your facility level coordinates. This data should already be pre-existing. When DNR creates a new site in SLEIS, this is one of the things we have to have in order to save it. But if you check your lat long and you notice that it's putting your facility point on the other side of town, or maybe it's in a cornfield a half a mile away or a mile away, and you have a better number that you want to put in here, that's fine. Go ahead and update it. Just know that there are some business rules here. So if I just typed in a latitude that falls outside the range of Iowa, we've got between 40 and 43 degrees north latitude. It's going to recognize that. So you have to put in a value between 40 and 43. You have to have at least 3 digits to the right of the decimal point, but no more than 7 total. So if I go here, type in my number, It looks like it met that business rule. And for whatever reason, anytime you correct data, it always throws you back to the facility tab. I'm not sure why. Windsor's aware of the problem, but it's not an enhancement that they can do to fix that problem at this time. So you'll just have to click back to the tab. I know it's kind of an inconvenience, but it is what it is. Latitude or longitude, there's also business rules in place. It's got to be between, I think, 90 and 93, and you got to have that negative symbol out front to indicate that we're in the Western Hemisphere. Once you have your latitude and longitude entered, your UTM, X, Y, and zone also update based off of the numbers that you have here. If you know the UTM, X, Y, and zone instead of the lat long, that's fine. You can update those 3 values, and then your latitude, longitude will also update. Down here at the bottom, none of this is required, but it's just if you have this information, your collection method, the data was collected, and then your geo reference point and geo reference system. If you know that information, go ahead and enter it down here at the bottom. The last tab, the additional information tab, this tab is going to be on every SLEIS screen. This is just extra information that was brought forward when we migrated data from SPARS to SLEIS. During our stakeholder meetings, it was communicated to us either by internal or external stakeholders that this information has value, and so they wanted to bring it along in the migration. If you want to enter information here, you can, but it's not required. So I'm going to save all that, and I'm going to click this user interface, this UI back button, and it's going to take us up 1 level back to the main 2022 emissions report screen, and that covers the facility button. So I'll pause there to see if there's any questions regarding what we just covered there and the facility button. Okay, no questions. We're going to go on to the release points button. It's the second button here under the facility inventory subheading. When I click that button, it brings us to a list of all the release points at our site. Scroll down here, this list is growing. We've been doing SLEIS training for 9 years now, so every time we have a new training session, we add a release point. So we've got quite a few release points that have accumulated over time. So you'll notice here you've got your release point identifier on the left, the release point type here on the second column, the status of your release point here, and then we have an actions heading here. Again, if you only have the viewer role, then you'll only see the magnifying glass or the view button here on the right underneath the actions heading. If you do have the editor role, you'll have the edit button. So again, if you're not able to edit anything, that's why you didn't specify that on your SLEIS access request form when you set your account up. Again, each one of these columns can be sorted ascending or descending, and you'll notice this filter box in the upper right corner. So in this case, this facility is starting to grow. We've got a lot of release points here. Instead of doing some scrolling, I mean, still there's only 39 release points. It's a quick scroll up and down, but maybe you're a facility that's got hundreds of release points. And if that's the case, then you can search by either descriptive name. So you've got this descriptive name underneath the identifier. So this one's a boiler stack, or you can search by your identifier. So if I searched for the release point that we created yesterday, or one of the release points we created yesterday, I just type in EP37, and it condenses the list just down to that one record. And click the X here to remove my search criteria, and it gives us our regular list, or our full list of release points. Okay, so there's an export button down here in the lower left corner. If you click that export button, it will allow you to download a zip file or open a zip file, and in that zip file you have a release points CSV. The additional information CSV is not going to have a lot of data that you're going to want to look at anyway, so we'll just skip that. But this release points CSV is going to allow you to view all the data for all these release points and do so in an Excel file. So if anybody at your site is interested in an equipment list without having to log into SLEIS and go from page to page to page, you can find all of the stack parameters and any data piece of data that's associated with your release point in this file here. Okay. So that's your export button in the lower left corner. If you needed to edit a release point, you can just click an edit button here, click the edit button here, and you can go in and change. Maybe you modified the permit for this welding booth number 3 during 2022, and you wanted to change your stack parameter, any of the stack parameters. You can click this edit button, and you can go in and change information here. I'm gonna back out of that, get back to our main list, and then what we're gonna do today is add a release point. So we're gonna show you how to add a new piece of equipment. Maybe you put in a new welding booth in 2022, and you need to add that to your emissions report. So I'm going to click this add button, lower right corner, and it's going to create basically a new template for our new record for this release point that you're going to add. So the first thing that we need to do, again, we've got 3 tabs across the top. We're looking at the release point tab here. The first item that we have to enter is the identifier. And so these identifiers can be the source of confusion. But if you are consistent with how you name and number these identifiers, starting with your construction permit application, and going through your emissions inventory, that's going to save you a lot of confusion, a lot of time trying to figure out what's what, especially if you have a lot of pieces of equipment at your site. So our message is be consistent. If you apply for a piece of equipment and you in that application you identify it as EP-38, and then the permit is issued to you as EP-38, then go into SLEIS and name it EP-38, because SLEIS treats EP-38, EP-38, and EP-38 as 3 different identifiers. So you really have to be consistent, pay attention to detail on how you're naming things. So I'm going to create this new release point ID. We're going to call it EP-38, and you'll see that the next thing here is the release point type. And if you click that, it's a drop-down menu. There's 7 choices for you. Right now, it's defaulted as downward-facing vent. Maybe that's not what it is, but if it was a downward-facing vent, you would have a description, a status, which is already defaulted to operating, which why wouldn't it be? You're creating it. Stack height, stack shape, stack diameter, and then your exit gas temperature and your flow rate down here. You can see that these are all required because they have that red bar on the left side of the field. If this is a fugitive release point, meaning there is no ductwork that is capturing emissions, it's just being emitted directly from the source. If you select that, you can see that a lot of those are collapsed. You don't have to report any parameters because a fugitive release point doesn't have a flow rate or a stack height, things like that. It would still require you to put in a description, and then that's it. If you had like a stockpile that's a fugitive source, you could put in the description here, and then if you had the information like the height of that stockpile, the width and the length at the base, you could enter that information if you wanted to, but it's not required. We're going to stick with a release point type of we'll call it vertical with rain cap, and as we change that back to a vertical release point, you can see that we now have to enter the stack parameters that are associated with that. So when you get to the screen, you're going to want to have your construction permit pulled up on your computer, or maybe you have a paper copy at your desk, because that permit is going to have all the information that SLEIS is requesting here on the screen. So again, we're going to call this we'll call this production welding booth number 2. The status is operating. Again, if it was something other than operating, permanently or temporarily shut down, then SLEIS would require you to put a status here. But since it's operating, it does not. Stack height, we'll say that our stack height from the ground is 15, and it's always in terms of feet. And then you have two options down here for the stack opening shape. It's either a circular opening or it's a rectangular opening. So if it's circular opening, obviously you would just need to put in the diameter of that opening. If you change this from circular to rectangular, you can see that once I click this radio button, there's going to be a length and a width field that opens up. So here's your stack opening length and stack opening width, and those need to be reported in feet. So when you go look at your construction permit, typically the opening of these stacks are always listed in the permit in inches. So you're going to need to convert from inches to feet before you put in the value here. We're going to keep the stack shape as circular. We'll say that our stack diameter is 12 inches. So I'll put in 1 foot, and then it's asking for your exit gas temperature, and that's always in degrees Fahrenheit. Again, this is found in your construction permit. So we'll just type in 100 degrees, and we'll list a flow rate of 1000. So this is our value, but where's our unit of measure? It's over here off to the right. It's not specifically labeled with your units of measure. So if you just click the drop-down menu, you have 3 options, either actual cubic feet per minute, actual cubic feet per second, or standard cubic feet per minute. If you select either ACFM or ACFS, then your exit gas velocity down here will auto-populate. It will not auto-populate if you use SCFM. So I'm going to go ahead and select ACFM, and then once I click out of this cell, you can see that the exit gas velocity is auto-populated, and there's a calculation being done in the background that's considering your flow rate and your exit gas temperature. Okay, so we've now satisfied all the business rules on this release point tab. Fence line distance is not required. There's a field down here that says related unit processes, and right now we've just gotten to the point where we've created the release point. We haven't gotten to the unit processes yet, but once we create the process that is venting through this release point, it'll be displayed down here, but there's nothing to display right now because we haven't created it yet. Let's say that, here, I'm gonna save this real quick. EP38, maybe. Okay, so this is a good example of an issue that maybe we had. Okay, so I'm looking at my notes, and it looks like we created EP38 yesterday. So SLEIS is looking at our list of identifiers, and it's saying, okay, well, we've got 2 EP38s. You can't have that. You got to have a unique identifier. So we're going to change this to EP39 instead and save that. And it says, okay, it's successfully saved. Okay, so at this point, you'll see that EP39 is now locked down. I can't actually go in there and edit that anymore. I've saved it already. I can still back out of it. I have this delete button down here in the lower right corner. So if I click delete, it would wipe all this out. EP39 would no longer exist. I could go back and create my production welding booth number 2 again, and I give it a different identifier. Once you submit your emissions inventory, though, your delete button would be taken away for this particular identifier. You wouldn't be able to delete it once you've submitted your report to the DNR. Okay, so I'm gonna throw a little bit of a curveball here and show you what happens when you change an existing piece of information to create a validation error on purpose. So let's say that next year, for 2023, I mean the current emissions year, but reporting next year, let's say you got a modification to the release point, a permit modification to this release point, and you decided that you needed to change your flow rate, that 1000 ACFM wasn't good enough dispersion, you needed to up it to 1500, and you were issued that permit from the DNR to to reflect that. So you've gone in here and you changed 1,000 to 1,500, and I'm good. I'm gonna move on my way with my reporting. Click the save button, and it gives you a validation error. It says, please correct issues on all highlighted tabs, and save your changes again. So you notice that you're on the release point tab, you got this yellow caution triangle, you scroll down, you see all this red text. What's going on? Okay, so the message that we're getting, it says the release point stack diameter, this data field, the flow rate, this data field, and or the velocity, this data field, are invalid. And SLEIS says when you make a change to either the stack diameter or the flow rate, which we just did, we changed the flow rate from 1,000 to 1,500. SLEIS is having a hard time then auto-populating this exit gas velocity because it wants to take the diameter and the flow rate to develop your exit gas velocity. So basically the database, it just needs to be refreshed. So in order to do that, you have to follow the directions in the order that they're given. So here it says when making a change to the flow rate, which we did, 1,000 to 1,500, it says please delete the gas velocity units of measure, which is this field here. How do you delete that? You just select the null option. And then the gas velocity value, which is this. This was the previously calculated value based off of a 1 foot diameter and 1,000 exit gas flow rate. So we need to delete that and then click the save button. And once we do that, you can see that SLEIS is now able to calculate your exit gas velocity based off of the updated flow rate and your previously existing stack diameter. So good example of SLEIS being a smart database and being able to tell you what's wrong and then specifically how to fix it to validate those errors. So that's the release point tab. We just created a new one for our production welding booth too. Underneath the location tab, none of this is required. You do have the ability to provide your geo coordinates for this specific release point, but you don't have to. If you provide one, you have to provide the other. If you don't, SLEIS is going to give you an error. So we go to the location tab, and it tells you longitude is required when latitude is specified. And it can't calculate your X, Y, and zone for your UTM with just one coordinate here. So I'm going to delete that, click the save button. It says please enter a valid latitude in the latitude field because I just deleted it. But if I click OK and click save, then it wipes away that error and I'm back to just null values here. Additional information, talked about it. This is just the custom information that was brought forward from SPARS to SLEIS. None of it's required. Okay, so that's how you add a release point. I'm gonna click the UI button to go back up one level to our listing of release points. Here they are. You scroll down here, you can see that EP39 is the point that we just added. If I click the UI back button again, it takes us back to the main 2022 emissions report screen. Any questions on release points? Okay, moving along. Christy's going to take over for control devices and emission units. Take it over.
Okay, so I think you can all see my screen here. Nick went through facility and release points. I'm going to go on to do the control device, which is right here. The screen looks pretty much like the release point screen. We have the identifiers, the control measure, the status. You can filter, you can sort, you can view or edit, export down here in the corner, or add a new one down here in the right corner. We are going to add some control equipment for the welding booth that Nick just created. So I'm going to click the add button in the lower right corner. The identifier, this is just like in the release point. You want to make sure you're following what's in your permit and keeping things standardized. The description, this is a required field, but it's an open field, so you can put in whatever you wish. We're going to keep it standard with what's in our permit too. So for the description, we'll call this, Nick called it production welding booth number 2, and then we'll just call this control equipment. Not sure what kind of control a welding booth would normally have. We're going to just put one in here for learning purposes, okay? The status, just like the other one, if it's operating, you don't have to have a status here, but if it's permanently shut down or temporarily shut down, we put in a status here. The control measure, this field is a type ahead field. You just have to start typing and see if you can find something. Some examples of some common controls are like a panel filter for a paint booth. So if we put in filter, you can see there are quite a few different options. There's this fabric filter, bag house. So that's a common one too. Some matte or panel filter, spray booth and filter. So there are a few options for those. So we'll just, we'll call this maybe a cyclone, just for fun. So there are lots of options, and if you can't find anything, there's always this other control device right here, 99, but you should try to find something that's descriptive of what you have. And then this section, this controlled pollutants, is really the most important part about the control devices. So as we go through the facility inventory at the end, we're going to link this control device to the release point and the emission unit and the unit process. It's all going to be together. And then when we go to report emissions, these controlled pollutants that we enter right here could be used to reduce the estimated emissions that you're calculating in the process emissions section. So for example, if we assume that this particular control device is going to reduce PM emissions by 50%, we will put that in here. And then when we go to report our emissions, we will use a pre-control emission factor, and then the control of 50% would be applied to PM10. Now, if we had other pollutants that it would also be applied to, we'd have to add them all. So I clicked this add button in the upper right to add another line to add more pollutants. So we can continue to do that. Let's say there's also, some manganese or welding wire that we're also controlling, that sort of thing. So we can continue to add with the plus button. And if we've added too many, we can delete them right here. This related unit processes, that's once we link everything together, we'll see a link here. And then here's the comments field on the bottom, and that's an open field. You can put in whatever you want. So I'm going to hit save on this, and then you'll see that it'll show up in the right here that it was edited. The additional information tab, just like in the release points, it doesn't have anything that is required. This is just extra information that you can add if it'll help you out, or if you think it'll be descriptive for us as well. Hit the save button. Okay, so here it gives us this message on the top. It says the control device was successfully updated. Estimated emissions have been recalculated for associated process emissions where applicable. We haven't entered any process emissions yet, so nothing was recalculated. But if we had, for example, already entered process data for this, and we had used a pre-control emission factor for a process that was associated with this control device, then it would recalculate these pollutants, manganese, PM10 and PM2.5, to include that 50% control. But if we had used a post-control emission factor, then that would assume that the emission factor already has the control applied, so it wouldn't make any changes. But we'll talk about that later. Okay, so that is the control devices. You can see I can delete this one now because I just created it. I can do some other editing. I can change the description, the status, control measure, control pollutants, but I can't change this identifier. So if I made a mistake there, I need to delete and start over. And I can't delete it once I've submitted the inventory. Does anyone have any questions about the control devices? If not, I'm just going to move on to the emission units, but if just interrupt if you have any questions at all, okay? Okay, so I'm gonna hit the back button to go up a level. This is all the control devices now, and I'll hit the back button one more time. So go up to the emission units. So I'm gonna go here to emission units. You can see the screen is like the others. If I want to edit something, I have to hit the edit button. If I just want to view it, I can hit the view button instead. So we're going to add, here's EU38, we're going to add an EU39. So we're going to add that welding booth that Nick has created the stack for, and I can create a control equipment for. So I'm going to click the add button in the lower right. And we will use the same systems. We'll call it EU-39. This unit type code is another one of those type ahead, do your best sort of files. So like I put in welding, there's nothing in there. So if I try, maybe there's some sort of metal fabrication, but there's not. So if we start with other, there's this other process equipment. There's a lot of other options as well. So just do your best to find what's close. And the description, we will call this production welding number 2. And the status is currently operating. If we change it to anything other than operating, we would put in a status here. This operation start date is for your information and for our information. It doesn't affect any of the calculations that you're doing. And the design capacity. So if we put in a design capacity, then we have to also add a unit of measure. You can't have one or the other. So welding is usually in 1,000 pounds per hour. So we'll use that 1,000 pounds per hour. Seems like a lot. And then related unit processes. So once Nick links everything together, there'll be a hyperlink here. We'll look at a hyperlink in another emission unit in just a second. And then there's the comments field. Additional information, nothing required. So we'll go back, we'll hit save. There we go. So here's our new emission unit, and I'm going to hit the back button to go look at the other units, and we can take a look at a related unit process. See, we have a link here now to the related unit process. Nick's going to create the unit process for the EU39 that we just created, but here, if we click on this link, it'll bring us to this unit process here for the unit process that was associated with that emission unit we were just looking at, EU07 welding booth number 2. If we hit the back button now, instead of taking us into the emission units that we were in, it's going to take us up a level in SLEIS to all the unit processes. So the browser back button will take us back to where we were before. So if I hit the browser back button one more time, so this is the unit processes page, this will get me back to where I was in the emission unit. So just a little tip about navigating through SLEIS, and if you're having problems with that, you know, just go to the home screen and hitting this back button here, the user interface back button will always get you up a level to get back to your home inventory screen. If you click it enough, you have to click it maybe at most 3 times. So So that's the control devices and the emission units. Does anyone have any questions before Nick shows us how to link it all together in the unit processes?
Okay,
Okay,
it doesn't look
Nick?
like, yeah. Thanks, Christy. Okay, so we're gonna share my screen again. And so we're ready to create the unit process, like Christy mentioned. So you just click this unit processes button and it will take you to a screen that should look familiar. You've got your emission unit identifier here on the left, your unit process ID here in the second column, the SCC or the source classification code. It's an 8-digit number that's associated with that process here in the third column, your status, and then your actions heading, and those buttons below that here on the far right. Again, you have your filter box, you still have your export button, and then your add button here on the lower right. So we're going to go ahead and add this unit process for the production welding booth number 2 that we've created so far by clicking the add button here in the lower right. And it takes us to a screen with 5 tabs on it. The first tab is the unit process tab and contains most of the information that we have to do the data entry for. So the first thing that we're tasked with doing is to create your process ID. And the process identifier, the way that we suggest facilities create this ID is by using like the root of this process ID will be the emission unit number itself. So Christy just got done creating EU-30, EU-39. And some emission units have the ability to have more than one process associated with it. So that's why we have a suffix of a -1. An example would be yesterday we created a boiler, and some boilers have the ability to burn multiple fuels. So if you have a natural gas combustion and also a fuel oil combustion process within a boiler, you'd have 2 processes. So in that case, you'd have EU-39-1 and EU-39-2. So you would create separate identifiers for each process. In this case, we've got this welding booth here, and we're going to create just EU-39-1. That's our process ID. And then if you click the drop-down menu for the emission unit identifier and scroll down, you can see that the emission unit ID that Christy just created is available for us to select. And so that's how you connect our process ID that we're creating right now with the previously created emission unit ID. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is create or enter our SCC number. SCC again stands for source classification code. There's that link on the welcome screen in SLEIS, where you can download a list of all your SCC numbers available for your industrial processes. And if you look at that spreadsheet, you can enter, do a hard data entry of the SCC code here in this box. I went, while Christy was presenting, I went to look at that spreadsheet, and I found the welding SCC number that we're going to enter here, and that number is 309051116. And you can see that as I type numbers, it's giving me a list. Again, type ahead is going to give me a list of numbers that include the search criteria that I'm typing in. And so that changes as I type in more numbers. So if I select 309051116 and I select it, then these 4 SCC level descriptions, level 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all populated based off this one number that I just selected. If I were to change it to 309051112, then you can see the 4 level descriptions over here changed. Just actually the raw material, it changed. It went from E310 electrode to E308 electrode. So it was just basically changing the 4th level description. So one way to enter this information is just through the hard data entry of a number here on the left side. If I click the X button, it doesn't wipe out the 4 levels here. But what I can do then is, I'm gonna cancel out just to kind of wipe this clear for demonstration purposes. Just re-add quickly the ID that I have here, which is EU-39 space -1. Link that to EU39 like we just did. Okay, so I just showed you one way to enter with the SCC code was doing the hard data entry. The other one is if you don't know your SCC number, you can build it incrementally using the 4 level descriptions. So I would select one of these 6 options here. And so I know that welding falls underneath the industrial processes group. And so when you select one, it automatically defaults to the first option in the drop-down menu for industrial processes, which is building construction. And then the first option under building construction is this construction building contractors, and so on and so forth for the last one. But I need to make sure that I've got the right description in there. So I'm going to go down and select fabricated metal products. And then you can see it changed here to include the first description. Again, I have to go down here and change it to make sure it matches the process that I have. And I'm going to select shielded metal arc welding. And then the last step is to enter the type of electrode that I'm using here. And I'm going to select E310, and I've arrived at my SCC number. Okay, so there's a place for you to put in your description. I'm going to skip that because we already have it pretty well described here. And then your status, again, defaulted as operating. You do have the option of PS or TS, in which case you would need to put in a year. We're going to leave that blank. Down here, related process emission. Right now, there's nothing listed. There would be an ID listed once we come back from break. We'll go into process emissions and we'll create that at that point, and then there'll be a hyperlink where we could go, if we were on this screen, we could click on the link that will be displayed here and go straight to the emissions report to see what the emissions were, but we haven't done that yet, so SLEIS doesn't have the ability to display it. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and click save. And then SLEIS is reminding me, okay, well, you're not quite done yet. You have to go through the rest of the tabs, specifically the release point apportionment tab, because it does have required information on that tab. I'm not going to skip over these two. I just want to show you what's available here. So if your welding booth or whatever you have at your facility, if it's subject to some regulatory program, you have the ability to type ahead here and select, whatever it is that your process is subject to. And if you have more than one, then you can add that using the add button over here on the right. But this is not a required field, so I'm just going to leave it be. I'll move on to the control approach tab. You'll notice here that nothing is required. There's no red bars or anything like that, but Christy did create our control device CE-39. And in order for SLEIS to give us credit for emission reductions when we go to create our emissions inventory here after our break, we have to link the process that I'm creating right now with the control device that Christy created. And the way to do that is through this control approach tab. So the first thing that's asked for, it's just SLEIS is asking, is this an uncontrolled or a controlled process? So if it was uncontrolled, then you would check this checkbox. But since it is being controlled, we're going to leave it unchecked. We'll move on to the control approach description. I think she called it a cyclone. Whatever the control device is, you would put in here as your description. And then this is the key component. Key component here is that you have to select a control device ID here in the dropdown. If you don't make the selection here, it will not link our process with the control device that we previously created. So to do that, you simply click the drop down, go down and select your device that is controlling the process. If you have more than one, which is entirely possible, you could click this add button and select another control device. We're going to limit it to a one-to-one relationship, and then move on to the release point apportionment tab. And so this is going to take care of our validation error here at the top. It's asking us to now, we've linked our process with our emission unit. We've linked it with the control device. And now the last step is to link it to the release point. We have to indicate to SLEIS how much of our emissions, our exhaust stream, is being vented to a release point. And we have to first identify which release point it is being vented to. And we're going to choose EP39. And then your total apportionment, it has to add up to 100%. So if you only have one release point, then you would type in 100, and that would allow you to validate the error. And we know that because it says it was successfully updated. But what if you have more than one release point that is venting emissions from this welding booth? Simply click the add button on the right, and you can add as many as you like. I'm going to put in a number that's not even. So if we have 3 release points that are venting emissions from this welding booth, then what we need to do is make sure it all adds up to 100. And we just tell facilities to assume that all of them are venting emissions equally. So in this case, we would just take 100 divided by n number of stacks. We have 3. So one has to be 33, one has to be 30, another one has to be 33, and then the third one has to be 34 in order for it to add up to 100%. Okay, so I'm just going to keep it at 100 to make it simple. Click the save button, and SLEIS should tell me that I successfully made that linkage between the process, the control device, as well as the release point. And it's taking just a little bit longer than it normally does. Not sure why. I might just interrupt the process here. Give me a unit process identifier must be unique. So I'm going to go back and look at, I wonder if it was just getting caught up on when I was creating our SEC number, and I had to go back and create it again. So now, yeah, I think that was just a refresh issue there. So I've made our the connection between our unit process, control device, and a release point. The last thing, last tab we have to go through is the additional information tab again. Just take a look at it. If there's something you want to add, feel free to do so. If not, that's fine too. So I'm going to click the UI back button to go back up to our listing of unit process IDs. This one, EU39-1, is the one we just created. If I click this again, it takes us back to our main 2022 emissions report screen. I'm going to stop sharing and give you guys a chance to ask any questions that you have over the unit processes, how to link it, or any of the buttons that we've gone over up to this point. No questions? Sure? Positive? Everybody's ready for a break. Let's come back at 10:20 and we will show you how to create your emissions inventory. See you here in about 8 minutes. Okay, welcome back. We're gonna continue with training. So now comes the fun part. This is probably what everybody's looking forward to, figuring out how to report your emissions in SLEIS. There's 2 ways to do it. I'll cover the first one. That's through the user interface. And then Christy will show us how to get your emissions data, throughput, operating schedule, that kind of stuff into SLEIS through the import feature. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And you can see that we've gone through all these buttons here at the top. Now we're ready to move on to the process emissions button. So go ahead and click that button. Once you do, you'll be taken to the process emissions listing. So it's going to display all of the unit processes at your facility that are listed as operating. If you have processes that are listed as permanently or temporarily shut down, they will not appear on this listing. Only the ones that are operating. So you can see that we've done majority of the work already through the previous 2 SLEIS training sessions that we had yesterday. We've got all of our annual throughputs entered, with the exception of a couple of unit process IDs here and here. You can see that the throughput is blank, and that's probably because we have a checkbox checked indicating that we don't need to report emissions for that process. But I'm going to scroll down here to EU-39-1. It's our production welding number 2. A couple things to say about this screen. Again, you have the filter box, and you can sort ascending to descending for each one of the columns if you choose. Again, the actions heading, depending on what role you have, that'll determine which buttons you see over here to the right. Since we have the editor button, I'm going to click the edit button here on the right, and that'll take us to our newly created process EU-39-1. Okay, so just a little bit about, and Christy mentioned it in her discussion about the emission unit IDs. There's different times that you might want to use the UI back button versus the browser back button. On the process tab, you can see the first couple things we see are hyperlinks to EU-39, the process, and EU-39, the emission unit. So if you clicked this hyperlink for our process ID, it's going to take us back to the unit processes button that we ended up right before break, where we had to make our connection between the process and the unit, the process and the point, and the process and the control. So if we wanted to go back to the screen that we were just at for process emissions, we would just use the browser back button, and it would take us back here. Again, you have the process tab and all your throughput information that you'll need to enter. If instead we are at the screen, we just got done clicking the browser back button. If instead we use the UI back button, it's just going to take us up a level. So it'll take us back to, we're in the unit processes screen. If we click this button, it would take us up a level to the unit processes listing. And then if we hit it again, it would take us back to the main report screen. So that's how to use those 2 buttons. Mainly use this button if you want to go up a level within the SLEIS database. Use the browser back button to take us back to the screen that you were just at. So I'm going to again click the process emissions button, and we're ready to enter emissions and throughput information for each one of our processes. And we're going to do that starting with EU-39-1. And I click the edit button, and I'm back again to this screen. Okay, so 3 tabs that we have to enter data for. The first one is the process tab. You can see that the first thing that we really have to concern ourselves with is this process is reported checkbox, and it's always listed as checked when we have a new process to report on. We can decide to not report throughput and emissions for this process ID. And if that's the case, then we would simply just uncheck this checkbox if there aren't any reportable emissions for the reporting year. If we do that, SLEIS is going to give us a message that says, are you sure you want to permanently remove these pollutants? And it's referring to, on this emissions tab, there'll be like this one big box here is information for each pollutant. So if you had a process that you had 5, 6, 7 pollutants on, you would really want to make sure that you're unchecking this checkbox, and you mean to do that, because you would wipe out data for all those pollutants if you clicked OK. So just kind of caution there. Make sure that you're sure about not reporting a process in the emissions inventory. What would be an example of that? So maybe this welding booth, it didn't operate in 2022. It might be better to just report a 0 throughput. So you would still report this process, but just put in 0 throughput, 0 emissions, all the way through. You know, these would all be zeros. That would avoid any unintended consequences as far as wiping out pollutant information if you uncheck the checkbox. So the other case that you might not report emissions for a process would be maybe it was exempt because the actual emissions for each pollutant were below our threshold, which is 10 pounds per year. But if you have questions when it comes to that kind of thing, you can definitely reach out to us. And then if there was a case where you weren't including a process, we would want to have documentation attached to the emissions inventory and SLEIS, indicating, you know, specifically what exemption you're referencing. Because if you don't include that, we're gonna compare your equipment list with what's in your emissions inventory, and if one's on the equipment list and not included in your inventory, we're gonna ask you questions about it. So it's always best to include more documentation rather than less. Okay, so with that, all that aside, we're going to report this production welding booth in our 2022 emissions report. First thing that we have to provide is our annual throughput. So I know that welding processes, there are emission factors in AP42 and WebFire online publications, that the emission factors are in terms of pounds per 1,000 pounds of welding wire used. So I want to make sure that the annual throughput that I report reflects those units of measure. That way SLEIS will be able to auto calculate my final emissions estimate. So I'm going to report it sounds kind of funny, but I'm going to report my annual throughput in terms of units of 1,000 pounds. So let's say this facility or this welding booth used a total of 10,000 pounds of electrode. So my throughput is 10, and my throughput unit of measure is, where's my unit of measure at? 1,000 pounds. So it's 10,000 pounds, if that makes sense. Sometimes facilities will make a mistake and they'll put in 10,000 pounds. Well, that's really 10 million pounds. And so that confusion in unit of measure can lead to an overestimate, lead to a potential health risk that is really just erroneous. So make sure that your unit of measure, especially on some of these like welding booths, are accurate. So it's 10,000 pounds. Throughput type, you select either E, I, or O. If you click the tip tool, it lets you know a little bit more about when you should select each one. We try to tell facilities, think about how your raw material is flowing through your process. So you're feeding wire into your welding booth. It's an input. If you're an ethanol plant or a grain facility and you're loading your product out to a truck or a rail car, we would call it an output. If you have a stockpile, it's not really an input or an output of the process, it's just kind of sitting there. That's a case where you might select existing. But for this welding booth, we're going to say the input, the throughput type is input. I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time trying to figure it out. If you do have questions about it, you need help, you can always call us. The last thing on the processes tab is the throughput material. And this is a type ahead field as well. So if you just start typing, I'm gonna type in electrode, and you can see the code 77 comes up. Don't worry about the number here. That is just an EPA code that we don't really need to concern ourselves with. So just electrode is good enough. There are supplemental calculation parameters down here at the bottom. So if you were burning coal, You could provide your ash content, your sulfur content, your heat content, comments. If there's something there you want us to know a little bit more about your throughput, you can certainly use this comments field, but it's not required. Okay, moving on to the operations tab. For any piece of equipment that you've previously reported on, it will be pre-populated with the last inventory data. So just check it to make sure it's still accurate. We're looking for your operation information as it pertains to this individual process, not your business hours of operation. Specific to, in this case, is production welding. So we're going to say we operated this welding booth 4 hours a day, 3 days a week, 26 weeks a year. And so when I click out of this cell to go to the actual hours, SLEIS is going to take 4 times 3 times 26 and give us an answer of 312. And you can overwrite this value, but whatever you overwrite the value to, it has to fall within 0.5% deviation of the calculated value. So if I click save, it tells me that 314 is not within 0.5% of 312. So I need to go maybe like 312.5. And then it validated that error message. Some facilities have accurate production records, maybe an hour meter for some of the equipment that they use, and they know this number right off the bat. And that's fine if you want to do a hard data entry in on that, but then you'd have to put in numbers in these 3 boxes that equate to whatever you have for your hour meter. Okay, so the last 4 boxes on this operations screen, we have to put in seasonal operations of total. So of all the time that you ran during 2022, what percentage of it was during the months of January, February, and December? What percentage of March through May, June through August, and September through November? And just for sake of training today and sake of time, I was going to put in 25% for each quarter. And you'll notice that it's not set up on a calendar quarter, it's set up on meteorological seasons, and that's because EPA sometimes uses data from states to model the emissions, and pollutants act differently during different times of the year when reacting in the presence of sunlight and heat for the case of ground level ozone. So like June through August, your emissions of NOx are going to count a little bit more toward ground level ozone than they would during the winter months. So that's why they have these seasonal operations set up with these particular months. If I click save, you can see that SLEIS now validates all the data that's been entered in both the process and the operations tab. And my last tab that I need to enter information for is the emissions tab. And I know that because I've got this yellow caution triangle here. And it tells me when I go there, process emission requires at least 1 pollutant to be reported. Okay, so I need to enter all the pollutants that are being emitted from my welding booth. And I can do that if I go out to AP42 or WebFire and find the emission factors for this particular SCC number. Okay, so if I went out there to AP42 or WebFire, I would know that this process is emitting several pollutants. The first one I'm going to type in is PM10. So if I start typing in PM, it gives me a list of all the pollutant codes that meet that criteria. If I select PM10, I'm good because I've got this red bar here. I've met that field business rule. Now I need to select a calculation method code. Okay, I have to basically say, where did you, where are you pulling your emission factor from? How are you finding that out? So there's lots of different ones to choose from. I'm saying that we used the emission factor that we found in AP42. AP42 is an EPA publication. So I look for EPA. I find it here, either code 28, and that says US EPA emission factor, pre-control, or if I scroll down here, there's also a US EPA emission factor that is a post-control emission factor. So if I selected post-control, that simply means that the factor that I found, if I type in 5.2, it's always in pounds. And then the denominator is here, 1,000 pounds, because it defaulted to a unit of measure that cancels out with our throughput that we entered here, 1,000 pounds. 1,000 pounds, that way SLEIS can do the math for you. If it's a different number, if the denominator doesn't match the numerator in for the reported throughput, so if I just change it to therms, you can see now that I have to do a hard data entry down here because SLEIS can't do that math. It can't cancel out the units of measure. So I'm going to change this back to 1,000 pounds. And I found my emission factor from AB 42. I put it in here. So it's 5.2 pounds per 1,000 pounds. If I keep my calculation method code as post control, that means that this number here is already accounting for control. And I can't, SLEIS will not allow me to use the control efficiency that Christy entered in the control devices button previously. So remember, she entered those 3 pollutants, PM 2.5, PM 10, manganese compounds. She listed these pollutants as all pollutants that are being controlled by the cyclone that she created, and she gave them each a percentage that they're being controlled by. Okay, so it's not accounting for it because I'm saying it's post control. It's already accounted for there. If I change this US EPA to pre-control, if I go up and select 28, once I change it, SLEIS wipes clear that emission factor, because anytime you change a calculation method code, you have to re-enter it. I'm going to put 5.2 in there, and now you'll notice that this field overall control efficiency 50% is displayed. And if you do the math on 10 multiplied by 5.2 divided by 2,000, because we're converting it to tons, and then you take half of it to account for the control efficiency, and you click this calculate button, it's going to tell us our emissions are 0.013 tons. Okay, so if you want SLEIS to be able to give you control efficiency, you have to select a calculation method code that has pre-control listed in parentheses. For anything else, whether you select no EF or post control, it's not going to enter or allow you to use a control efficiency, because otherwise you'd be double counting your control. You see I selected SEMS here. Any calculation method code that has no EF in parentheses, so if I selected material balance no EF, it has grayed out both my emission factor and my emission factor unit of measure fields. I can't click on them. I'm left to conduct a hard data entry in my estimated emissions. So if I typed in 0.25, okay, that's great that I'm putting in my number, but how did you get there? How did you go from 10,000 pounds of electrode usage to 0.25 tons of emissions? We're missing an emission factor. And if that's the case, you can either enter your calculation here, or you can attach your documentation using the report attachments button. But we have to know how you got from how you arrived at this emissions estimate. So the best choice is to use a calculation method code that allows you to put in an emission factor here, 5.2 pounds per 1,000 pounds. Hit the calculate button, and there I've successfully met the business rule for PM10. You'll notice there's a row up here. If I click this row, it collapses. If I click the row again, it opens up a window for me to see all of the detail. So that's just one pollutant. Let's say I have another pollutant to enter, and I'm going to enter manganese compounds. How do I do that? I just click the add button in the lower left corner to add another box. Okay, I'm going to collapse PM10 for now. And I'll start typing in manganese. And there it gives me that code. Again, I found it in AP42. It's a pre-control emission factor, and this one is 0.318 pounds per 1,000 pounds. So I'm basically saying for every 1,000 pounds of electrode I use, I'm emitting 0.318 pounds of manganese. But then SLEIS is applying a 50% control, and you have to divide it by 2,000 to get tons. And again, I can collapse that window by just hitting that row, clicking that row, either way. Okay, so I'm going to click the save button again. And that's how you enter emissions using the user interface. The last thing that I'll say here is you've got this previous button and a next button, and these buttons just take you to the previous and next unit process ID in the listing. So if you click next long enough, if you click it enough, it's going to bring you to the last of your listing, and then the next button will disappear and you'll only have the previous button. Just like if you click previous enough times, then it's going to take you to the top entry, and then that button will disappear as well. Any questions on how to enter emissions data in the UI?
Carmen has a question. She asked, does SLEIS populate everything from 2022, the current year, on this process emission screen, except for estimated emissions in tons? So the same control device percentage, et cetera, does not have to be entered every year again.
Control. Yeah, go ahead, Christy.
Oh, I was just going to say SLEIS populates everything except for the throughput. So it brings across the control percentage, the operating schedule, the emissions factors, unit of measures. So if your emissions factors haven't changed and your units of measure match, then all you have to enter is the throughput and hit save. And check everything, make sure nothing's changed. But if that's the best case scenario for your data entry, you might have to change other things.
Any other questions on the process emissions, entering data in the user interface? Okay, I'm hand it over to Christy, and she can show us how to use the import feature.
Okay, so the data import feature is really useful if you have a large facility, and a lot of large facilities have some sort of environmental data management program. So this could be used to flow the data into the template and then upload it from there. So I'm going to show you how to download the template. It's right here, this download template button under the process emissions tab. We hit download, and that will download a zipped file with 4 files in it. We are not going to look at the one I just downloaded because we're going to look at the original one. So we've already submitted this inventory a few times because this is our 3rd training. So we're going to look at the original download, which would have been blank. Oops. Okay, so this is the first one I downloaded. And you'll see these are the 4 files that you would download. This reference data values file is a file that has all of the data values that are the shortened versions that you put into these CSV files when you upload them. So I'll show you what it looks like. So for example, we were looking for a throughput unit of measure for welding processes. It's usually 1,000 pounds, right? So instead of putting in 1,000 pounds, you would put in E3LB right here. 1,000 pounds is what we know it to be. E3LB is a shortcut for you in this file. It's called the value that you're using, and then there's the description. So when you're in the user interface, you see these values when you select them. I'll show you an example. So for this spray booth, this value, this 367, that would be what you're selecting. And like for throughput of unit of measure, the GAL is the shortened value, and then gallons is the description. So we were looking at 1,000 gallons or 1,000 pounds. So we can find it here at the E3LB, 1,000 pounds, and then there's a description, 1,000 pounds. So there are a couple different places you can look for these values, but the reference data values file could be useful too. Okay, so once you've taken a look at that, then we'll look at this processes file and then the process emissions file. There's a fourth file. It's called process supplemental parameters. And all that's in the fourth file is a line for each process and then a column for each of these supplemental calculation parameters, which aren't generally used. So it's not required that you upload it, and but it's there for you if you need it. So this has % ash, % sulfur, and the heat content. Okay, so processes. So I believe it was Carmen, you asked this question about the throughput and what SLEIS keeps and what it doesn't. So when we originally had the blank inventory, the brand new inventory, the throughput is not kept, but things like the throughput material, the throughput unit of measure, and the operating schedule are all there for you. So this particular file has a line for every process, and then it has a column to describe everything that we put into the user interface is in a column here. So the emission unit that Nick just added is not in here because I downloaded this before we added it, but it would be down here as EU39. But we can look here at EU37. And so that's the emission unit. The process ID is next. And then the SCC number, just to help you figure out what you're looking at, is reported. So that's that checkbox. And that's uncheck this box if there are no reportable emissions for the emissions year. So it defaults to true to checked. But if you don't have anything to report for that process, you can change it to false. And then you don't have to complete anything else in the file. Is confidential. We don't use this checkbox here. It's not available in the user interface. If you do have confidential data, work with Nick to get that submitted properly. The throughput quantity, that's the one that you have to put something in for. So that's your data input. And then you want to make sure your quantity matches your units. So just like Nick was talking about the 1,000 pounds. So make sure you're putting in, so if you use 3,000 pounds, you put in 3 and then 1,000 pounds for the throughput unit, that sort of thing. Make sure those match. The throughput type, this is that input output existing. So these all have inputs, but if you measured your throughput at the output, you could put output there, or if it's like storage pile, like Nick talked about, you would put existing. The throughput material, that is that shortened value that we can see if we look in the user interface or in this reference data values file. The comments, that's an open field. You can put anything in there. And then next up, this operation start time and stop time is not used in the user interface, so we can skip that. The average hours per day, days per week, weeks per year, and then actual hours of operation. You can ignore this P column, the actual days per period. Anything that is in this file when you go to upload it has to still meet the data validation that SLEIS has. So that means that our hours per day times the days per week times the weeks per year has to be within 0.5% of this actual hours of operation. And if you're unfamiliar with the way that CSV files work, is that you can put in, like, for example, I like to put in an equation to determine the hours per day times days per week times weeks per year. If I put this equation in here, I can, obviously Excel will do the math for me. But when I go to save this, it's not going to save the equation. It's going to save the value, which is perfect because that's what I need. But if I did want to keep my equations to use later, I'd have to save it as an Excel file. And then before I upload it into SLEIS, I would have to save it as a CSV file. So that's the hours of operation. Then there's that seasonal schedule that Nick talked about, December to February, March to May, June to August. So this was a new process. That's why I have to fill this out. But if it's an existing process, it would already be in there for you. And then we can ignore these last few columns. Even if there's no data to put into the columns and we could ignore them and they're not in the user interface, we need to leave them in the file because SLEIS requires it to be in the file. So don't delete them, but you can ignore them. You can even hide them while you're looking at them, but leave them in the file for the upload. Okay, so that's a processes file. And then once you have completed the throughput quantities and updated your throughput materials and your operating schedule, then you can take a look at the process emissions file. We'll look at a blank process emissions file first. That was not the one I wanted. Okay. So this is the blank process emissions file. That's what you would see when you download. So we have our emission unit ID and our process ID, just like in the previous file. This file is a little different in that it has a line for every single pollutant that's reported. So you can see that EU-1001 has like 10 different pollutants reported. So it's in here 10 times and each pollutant code is unique, right? So that means each line is unique. The calculation method code, this 8 means the EPA emission factor. So the calc method code is always, you can always find it either by looking here. So 8 is, see, it says 8 right here. That says US EPA EF post control. So you can always find it there, or you can find it in that reference data values file. And then the emission factor and the emission factor unit of measure. And if the unit of measure and the emission factor or in the throughput unit of measure, if this emission factor unit of measure and the throughput unit of measure cancel out, then you don't actually even have to put in an emissions quantity because SLEIS will do that math for you. And in fact, if you did put in an emissions quantity, if SLEIS can do the math, it's going to use its own math and ignore your emissions quantity. So that's something important to know too. The stack test date. So if you are estimating your emissions based on a stack test, it would be useful to put that data in there for us, but it's not a required field. And then the comments field is an open field. When you upload data with something, upload a file with something in this comments field, it will show up right here. That's that comment field. The comment field in the processes file is this comments field on the process emissions process tab. Okay, so I added EU39, that emission unit that we created, and I put in a throughput unit of measure. I can't remember what Nick used, but I'm going to assume he didn't use 500,000 pounds. So then we'll know that my data will overwrite his data. Okay, so here's the throughput material and a comment I wanted to add. And then we have to make sure we include the operating schedule. So 4 times 5 times 50 should be what, 1,000 hours. And then we have to make sure we include our seasonal operations. Okay, so that one is ready. And then we just need to save it. And when you save these, you want to make sure you save them as a CSV file, comma delimited, comma separated values file, okay? Okay, and then you also have to add some, pollutants here. So for example, I'm going to add just one pollutant, and when I upload this, it's going to overwrite all of the pollutants that that Nick added. So So it's like you're saving the entire process emission. So if you are going to upload it, just make sure that you understand that you're overwriting everything in that process when you do it. So I put in our 1,000 pounds for our throughput unit of measure. I put in an emissions factor. Sorry, the emissions factor unit of measure is 1,000 pounds. And I'm not going to include anything in this column, which is the estimated emissions column, emissions quantity column, because I don't need to. SLEIS is going to overwrite it. But let's say I did put something in, like let's say I put in 5. We'll see what comes up. Okay, so I'm going to save this. Saving it as a CSV. And then in order to upload this into SLEIS, we have to hit this import data right next to the download template. And if you are going to use some sort of data management system to do this, you don't have to continue to download this template every year. You can just add to it as necessary if you have it all, flowing into an Excel file that you like a lot. As long as it meets all the data validation that was in this download template, that template that you downloaded, right? Okay, so here's my processes file. There's 3 places to upload files. This process supplemental parameters file does not need to be uploaded. There's no red bar. So I linked my processes file. I'm going to hit browse to link my process emissions file. You'll notice that until I link that file, I can't hit that continue button. It's grayed out. Okay, so here's my process emissions file that I just edited. And now I am going to hit continue. And then if I have any errors when I upload this, it's going to give me a description of every error that I have with the error and then the description of where it is. So it's pretty helpful. Unfortunately, I didn't have any errors this time, so I can't show it to you. Maybe I should go back and make some. But first, let's look at our process emissions. It says that I successfully imported 31 process records and 85 process emission records. So the 31 process records are the 31 processes, and there were 85 pollutants that were assigned to each of those processes, right? So 85 lines. So here is that welding wire that, or that welding unit that we added. You can see that I put in 500,000 pounds. So it overwrote what Nick put in. And then for the emissions, remember I put in 5 as the estimated emissions. And as you can see, it just changed it to 0.125, which is how the math works out for PM10. And then if Nick had additional pollutants here, but it's not, they're not there because I overwrote it. The other thing you'll notice is we don't see the control percentage that we entered because I'm using a post-control emission factor. I'll show you what the file looks like when you make a mistake real quick. I'm just going to upload the empty files and then we can see what the errors look like. We're going to get a lot of them because they're totally empty, but that's okay.
Christy, we've got a question in the chat. So there's a little bit of confusion on whether it's better to use the interface as opposed to the import feature, because you mentioned that like the pollutant that I entered, manganese, it got was overwritten by just the PM10 pollutant code. Do you want to explain why manganese was overwritten there?
Yeah, so if we go back to this file that I uploaded, it was the process emissions file, right? And in it, I only put PM10. If I had put manganese for EU39, it would have overwritten that too, to whatever is in this file that I uploaded. So basically, if you do use the data upload, whatever is in your file that you're uploading for each individual process will overwrite what was originally in the database. So if I were to download, if after Nick had entered that information for EU39, if I had downloaded the template then all of that data would have been in the file. I mean, I could do it now. I could download the template. You can see everything that's in SLEIS currently would be in that template that I download. So basically, it's really up to you if you want to use the data import or if you want to use the user interface. For smaller facilities, it's almost always quicker just to use the interface. But if you have if you have a lot of processes that don't change at all, the emissions vectors don't change, it might make sense to use the upload. Or if you have a data management system, then that's another time that it might make sense to create a spreadsheet that you can then just save as a CSV and then upload into SLEIS. That can make sense for you. So it's really up to you. If you have any questions about whether it would be appropriate for your facility, you can just give me a call, or after the training, we can talk about it a little more. Or just send me an email, something like that. Okay, so this is our error list that we created because I uploaded the empty. So you can see it says process emission annual throughput is required for every single process in the file. So the emission unit, it tells me which unit and which process for all the errors. And then I can download the error report as a CSV file that I can open in Excel and look at if I want to, or I can print it. But then you can, so because my upload was unsuccessful, I didn't overwrite anything in SLEIS. So nothing has changed in here. Like my annual throughput is what it was before. It didn't go back to being blank because I had an unsuccessful upload and it didn't meet the data validation. So it was unable to save. So that is the data upload. I hope I didn't confuse anyone. If you are really confused, just use the interface. It's great. Yeah. So once you are ready and you think you're ready to submit your inventory, there are a few checks that you should do. First, you should look at, if you're a Title V facility, this is a good file to look at, but otherwise you can look at this total emissions by source. We'll look at the fee payment one first. So if I click HTML, then it opens this SLEIS form 5.0, and this form has all of your emissions fees. Right now, the fee rate is set to $0 per ton because the EPC hasn't met yet to set the fee rate. They meet in May. So once that happens, then we will change that fee rate to whatever the EPC sets, and you'll be able to see the fee due for the Title V facilities. Minor source facilities do not pay fees. So this entire document is unavailable to minor source facilities. But if we scroll down a little further, we can see all the regulated air pollutants that the facility emitted, and then all the hazardous air pollutants that we reported as well. So this is a good check just to see if anything looks off. So take a look at that. And then if we go back to our SLEIS page, we can also look at this total emissions by source. That'll give you basically the same information, but in a file without that extra information for the form 5.0 with the fees. And then if you do see something off, it would be helpful to look at the total emissions by emission unit or release point to determine exactly which process you reported wrong, right? So if, for example, I reported really high manganese emissions and I didn't expect it, I can just look at this file here, hit Control F and find where I reported manganese and see like, oh, EU27 shouldn't have reported manganese, and then I can go fix it. So that's a useful tool, useful page. And then this is my favorite, this process emission summary. So you download a CSV file. It's one file that has a line for every pollutant emitted. A bit like that process emissions file, but it has all the information for the release point, the control devices, everything that's associated with that process. Hit download, and it's taking its time. So once you think everything is correct there, then you can validate the report. And if you are not the submitter, this is the only action that you have available to you before, or the last one before your submitter comes in to submit it. So when you validate the report, SLEIS just goes through all those checks and makes sure that everything's reported as necessary and meets all the data validation, and you didn't skip reporting any processes or anything like that. So I hit validate and it says no errors were encountered while validating the report. The most common error you're going to see is that you missed reporting a process. And you don't have throughput reported and you didn't uncheck that checkbox for processes reported. That would be the one you would usually see. So if you do get to the point where you have no errors and you're happy with your submission, you can click this mark as ready for submission button. And then this indicates to users with the submitter role that the report is ready for submission. So if I have the submitter role, which I do, and I log into SLEIS, and I see my list of facilities right here, you're going to see that my 2022 emissions report is ready for submission. So I can click here and then hit initiate submission. I don't have to go through that step though. If I already have the submitter role, I'm ready to submit it. I'm looking at my report. I can just initiate the submission right here. So initiate submission. What happens when I do that is it's going to do that validation one more time. And then I am going to look at the electronic document. You'll see I can't hit continue for my submission process right now. I have to view the electronic document. And then the document should download. There we go. So it's a PDF. It has information for everything that we entered today or had already been in SLEIS today. So it starts with this emission summary, like that canned report that we looked at earlier. And then it has all the facility information, so contact information, address, lat long, NAICS codes, that sort of thing. And then it has every release point with all the stack details, whether or not it's operating. And then it has every control device with all the controlled pollutants and the control measure. The emission units, including the design capacity. And then it has the unit processes. So that's where everything is pulled in together. So here you can see the emission unit ID and the unit process ID. And then if it's controlled, it'll list the control device. So let's see, like this one is controlled with CE03, and then you can see it has the release point apportionment too. So everything that's linked together in the unit process is available here. And then if we scroll down, we'll see the process emissions. So here's the process information with the throughput, the operating schedule, and then each individual pollutant, including the emissions factors and the estimated emissions. Okay, so once you take a look at that, you're happy with it, you're ready to submit, you can hit this continue button. If you're not the submitter, there's a link in those canned reports to get a similar report. I'll show it to you when I'm done submitting this. So here you have to check all these boxes to show that you are, or to agree that you are allowed to submit it. Everything is true and accurate. You're the responsible official. If you are for the Title V facility, if you're a minor source, you check it anyway, but it doesn't really apply. Okay. So once I get that last checkbox checked, the continue button is available to me. So I'll hit continue. And then I have my username and password saved in my browser, but this does not ask for my username. It's asking for a challenge question that I have entered previously. So I deleted my username. I'm going to answer my challenge question. And then here is my password. It is already saved, but I could re-enter that password. And then we hit continue. And if you did that successfully, here's your official copy of record. That copy of record will continue, or that will that will contain that confirmation number and when you submitted it, in addition to all that other information we just looked at. If you don't have submitter rights, you can also look at this emissions inventory report, the verbose one right here. You can look at it as an HTML or download a PDF that looks pretty much like what we downloaded before when we were submitting the inventory. And then you can see the emissions report changed to submitted instead of in process. Yeah, we can view the submission history. This is the third time we submitted this inventory because it is the third training that we've done this year. I can download a copy of that. That includes the submittal information, the official copy of record, or I can repudiate it. That's what Nick was talking about way at the beginning. That is where basically your inventory was submitted fraudulently by someone who wasn't supposed to, something like that. Now, if I just made a mistake, I realized I forgot to include a process that is new, or I forgot to include a pollutant or something like that, I should request an amendment right here. So I'm going to say DNR, I forgot to include lead emissions. That would be an oversight that I definitely want to fix. So I am going to submit my amendment request, and then Nick is going to get that request. Actually, we all will. And then one of us will authorize. You can see it says amendment requested today. It still says submitted, but once Nick or Jason approves my amendment request, then it is going to be available to me to change again. So right now, oh, yep. So Nick made the change. So now I can make a change in the process emission section. Before that, before he made the change, I would only be able to view everything, not edit anything. But here you can see the edit action is available to me, and it's back to in process. So I can make my changes, resubmit my inventory. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions about submitting the inventory? Or Nick or Jason, if you think we've forgotten anything.
Yeah, so I had a question in the chat. Looks like there's a couple more. I'm just going to address the ones that I saw. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here.
There you go.
Okay, so going back to EU 39, we had a question on if you have if you have stack test data. Okay, so I'm going to add pollutant code PM 2.5. Actually, I'm going to change that. I'm going to add manganese. And if you have stack test data specific to your facility, to this release point, say we tested this production welding booth, the way you would report your stack test information is you would go down here and select your calculation method code. Most stack test results that you get from your stack testing company, or if you get a stack test summary from Iowa DNR, the result that you get is after the control device. So you would select this calculation method code of 4.1 stack test EF post control. Okay, and I would say a good percentage, overwhelming percentage of these stack test results are in terms of pounds per hour. Okay, so it's still helpful for the department to know how much material you used, 500,000 pounds in this case. You can keep your emission factor in terms of pounds per hour. So I'm just going to say 0.02 pounds per hour of manganese compounds. And right now it's listed as 1,000 pounds, but we can change that to pounds per hour. When we do that, again, if you change your unit measure, your emission factor is wiped out. So you have to re-enter that. So I've got 0.02 pounds per hour. And then your estimated emissions, you would enter in here. I'm just going to go off of what we had for hours of operation. We have 1,000 hours in there. So 1,000 hours times 0.02 pounds per hour divided by 2,000 pounds per ton gives us 0.01 tons of emissions. Okay, so again, we would need to know, because here we're looking at 500,000 pounds multiplied by 0.02 pounds per hour. It's not clear necessarily how you came up with this estimate. So we would want you to spell it out for us. 1,000 hours times 0.02 pounds per hour times 1 ton over 2,000 pounds equals 0.01 tons, something like that. Okay, so maybe your throughput is in terms of hours instead of 1,000 pounds to get your emissions estimate to work out, to cancel. SLEIS will auto-populate it for you. But we would prefer to know, again, how much raw material you used as opposed to putting in the number of hours you operated for this piece of equipment for 2022. So hopefully that answers the question in the chat. If it doesn't, stay on the line after the end of the training and we can talk a little bit more about that. We also had another question in the chat about what if you have 2 stack tests for an emission point? What number do you use? If they're both valid stack test results, and they're both in the same emissions year. So if you say you tested in April of 2022 and then you tested again in November of 2022, what you would do for the first 3 months of the year, so January 1st through March 31st, if you had a stack test prior to 2022, you would apply that stack test to the first 3 months of production for 2022. Then from April 1st through October 31st, because you had a test on April 1st, you had a test on November 1st, you would take that time frame, April 1st to October 31st, the production amount of your raw material for that segment of the year, you would apply to your April 1st stack test. Then you would take your production amount from November 1st to December 31st and apply it to your November 1st stack test. So you're segmenting off your production segments of the year and applying it to the stack test result that happened right before that production period. At that point, you would combine, add up all of your emissions totals, enter that here. And in that case, since you had multiple stack tests, you would probably choose stack test no EF, so you're not reporting an emission factor. Graze this out, graze this out. You would do a hard data entry on the sum of those 3 segments, 0.25 tons or whatever. And then your 3 individual segments of emissions that you estimated based on those 3 different stack tests, you would either spell that out in the comment field or you would attach a document to the report attachments button that Christy showed you.
Hey, Nick.
Yes.
Carmen had an additional question. So if you have 2 stack tests that did not pass in that same year, do you use the emission factor from the last stack test that passed?
That would be kind of a case-by-case basis. Maybe it didn't pass because it was out of, it wasn't in compliance with your permit limit. So it's hard to give you an answer that would fit every scenario. And in that case, contact us and we can help you figure out the best course of action. Any other questions do we need to catch up on?
I saw there was one more question from Carmen about the template. She asked, once you make changes, do you download the template again? And you don't have to download the template again after you make changes. You can change the template yourself. Like, for example, if I added a process, I don't necessarily have to re-download the template to get that process in there. I can just type in the process ID and the unit ID in that processes file, and that'll get it in there for the upload. So it's kind of up to you how you use it once you start using it to get comfortable with how to change the template. and understand how that'll get into SLEIS.
Any other questions up to this point? Those are great questions. Appreciate you answering or asking those. Those are things we don't typically get to during training because they're kind of specific, but very helpful for everybody to hear the answers on those. So thank you, Carmen. And thank you, Mike. Okay, so that wraps up the training specific to SLEIS. I want to share one more piece of information with you. And that is just, we'll take you out to the Air Quality Bureau website. This is our main screen. You can see that right now there's some, this is like our air now. Actually, it's not ours. It looks like, I think it's EPA data that shows you just different concentrations of measured pollutants right now in the atmosphere over Iowa and the Midwest. But over here on the left, you see that there's an emissions inventory link. If you click that link, it'll take you to a web page. You can head off into the Title V or the minor program, and a lot of our guidance documents are stored underneath the minor sources link. So if you click that link, it'll take you to, here's like a table of what section of the state we're inventorying and due dates and that kind of thing. We have an instruction booklet for minor sources, but all of our guidance documents and our calculators are stored underneath this link here: emissions reporting, guidance documents, and reference material. So here is a page that has all of the calculators that the Iowa Air Emissions Assistance Program has developed. This is what Jennifer was talking about at the beginning of the training. We have calculators specific to certain industrial processes. An example would be abrasive blasting, dual fuel combustion. There's a painting calculator. But then we also have reporting spreadsheets for limestone crushing, concrete batch, and hot mix asphalt, as well as a group 2 grain elevator calculator. So these Excel files you can download if you're that industry type. You can complete your emissions inventory via an Excel file and just email it back to us. Those industry types have that option. If you're not one of those industry types, you have to submit your emissions inventory using SLEIS. So just wanted to make you aware of some helpful tools and resources that we have out on our website. So there really isn't anything left to talk about. We'll stay on the line. We have this scheduled until noon. So if we need to stay on and answer questions specific to your facility, feel free to hang out with us for a little bit. If not, I'm just glad that you took some time out of your day to spend with us and learn a little bit more about SLEIS. Again, feel free to reach out to us, call us, email us. Don't feel like you're being a nuisance. Our job is to be here for you and help you stay in compliance with the emissions inventory reporting requirement. Again, March 31st is the deadline for Title V facilities. Minor sources, you have a little bit longer. That goes until May 15th. The best thing to do is get on it right away. Don't save it until the very last thing, because there's a lot of other facilities out there that do the same thing, and you're less likely to get our full attention and a quick response if you wait until the end, because we're trying to help everybody at the same time, it seems like, every year. So my best piece of advice is to start on it and get it done as soon as you can. And again, don't be afraid to speak up and reach out to us. We're here to help you out. So with that, if you need to move on with the rest of your day, thanks for coming again. And if you want to ask some questions, we'll be here for a little bit longer. So have a good day.